So as I said a moment ago, I want to share with you over the next several weeks tools for living, 7 specific tools for living. And they're taken in part from a book that I became acquainted with a few months ago. And I was drawn by the title. Do you ever get particularly drawn by the title of a book? I certainly do. And I was drawn by the title of this book, Be Useful. And I think I was drawn by the title because I'm a really practical person. My mom used to say that I came into this world serious, that I was a serious baby. Now, I don't know how you look at a baby and say a baby's serious, but moms know things, I think. And she said, you came in serious. And I think that that's true. I'm serious, I'm deep, I'm very practical, I'm very task-oriented, very driven by goals and visions. What's possible? What can I do? How can I improve this situation for myself or for others? And so I was taken by the title of the book, Be Useful. But then I was also a little troubled by the author. And I want to give a bit of a disclaimer here because some of you may really like this author and some of you may not like this author. And over the many, many years of being a spiritual teacher and sharing this platform with so many great authors and lots of great thinkers, what I've come to know is that a person can write a really great book and give a really great talk, and they're still human beings, and we may like them as a person or not like them as a person, but to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, that if we find concepts and ideas that are helpful, that we take it for what it's worth. So the author is Arnold Schwarzenegger. Arnold Schwarzenegger. And I actually first knew something about him because of my brother. My brother actually was the one that got me on a personal growth path. My brother is 1.5 years younger than me. We were both in high school. I was probably a junior. He was a couple years back. And Wayne Dyer had written his first book. Do you remember the title of it? Your Erroneous Zones. My brother got the book, didn't read it because, well, he started to read it, and then he said, Wendy, here, this is for you because he thought it was your erogenous zones. That's what he thought. He thought, no, it's not, so I'll give it to my sister. She might like this book. Why was I telling you now about Wayne Dyer? Because I was telling you about the many different people I've come to know, and we can grab ideas that are helpful, whether it is from a person that we might completely agree with otherwise or not. So it was because of my brother that I first knew anything at all about Arnold Schwarzenegger. My brother was a very, very accomplished amateur bodybuilder. And so his draw into the Schwarzenegger world was through bodybuilding. Anyway, we know that this man, Arnold, really made something of himself and really had a vision for his life and set lots of goals for himself. And in his book, Be Useful, he identifies 7 ideas that if you didn't know it came from him, you'd say this could have been from Ernest Holmes, the founder of religious science, or you could say this came from Wayne Dyer, or this came from Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, because these are the tools he suggests in this book on being useful in life. Clear vision, that's where he starts, and that's what we're going to focus on today. Big thinking, hard work, clear, direct communication, resiliency, open-minded curiosity, and a commitment to giving back. Doesn't that sound like personal growth? Doesn't that sound like metaphysics? It sounds an awful lot to me like Ernest Holmes and like Charles and Myrtle Fillmore. So the first tool, the tool of clear vision. When we don't have a vision for our life, we tend to wander very aimlessly. We're easily knocked back and forth by things. We kind of drift with no sense of direction when we don't have a vision for our lives. When we do have a vision for our lives, we have a sense of purpose. We have a sense of direction. We have something that we are aiming toward, even if we seem to take a lot of zigzags along the way to get there, even if we seem to stall out from time to time, or even many times. When we have a clear vision, we have a sense of purpose and a sense of direction. We also have something then to kind of measure our progress against. Are we making a little bit of progress toward that image, toward that vision? Some of you in this room and online are very knowledgeable about the Bible. You know the Old Testament stories and the New Testament stories. Some of you maybe not so much so. But one of the most powerful examples of vision that we can pull from the Old Testament is how Moses used the idea of vision to help the Israelites leave Egypt and move toward the Promised Land. He kept in front of them, both in words and in concepts, this idea of where they had come from, which was not very pleasant, to where he was directing them to the Promised Land. And he used words like a land flowing with milk and honey, something that they could wrap their minds around as a place that would give them abundance and a good life. So he painted this vision for them, and that vision helped sustain them through a very long and very, very difficult wandering. And in that, we have the phrase that was used, where there is no vision, the people perish. Where there is no vision, the people perish. I was thinking about Myrtle Fillmore, our co-founder of the Unity movement. Unity was founded in the late 1800s. If you know much about Unity, you know that its headquarters is located just outside of Kansas City, Missouri, in a municipality that bears the name Unity Village. It is a beautiful, about 12,000 acre property that is devoted to spiritual learning, to retreats, to prayer, to lifting people into a world of possibility, into greater physical health, greater abundance, better relationships. But it came out of a vision that Myrtle Fillmore had. A vision of a place dedicated to people's growth, dedicated to people's spiritual evolution. And she shared that vision. She described that vision to her husband, Charles. And eventually, she had the vision in 1919. And in about 1920s or so, they found a piece of property. And they began to build out from that vision. It's something that still drives Unity as a movement today. The idea of vision, what can we be? What does the world need? And the same, we can bring it back to ourselves individually. What do we want? How can we be? What is our difference to make in the world? What is the picture that we hold for ourselves? Even more than Unity Village, Myrtle Fillmore used the power of vision to heal herself. In fact, that's how Unity began. She was diagnosed with tuberculosis. She was given only a couple of years to live. She had been taught to think of herself and picture herself as weak and frail. Well, she lived that out for a while, so much so that she was dying of tuberculosis. And doctors said, we don't know what to do. And she heard an idea. She attended a lecture, much like we, whether we're sitting in a room like this or tuning in, we might hear an idea that is different than anything we've heard before, that somehow we just resonate with that idea and we think, wow, I believe that. That seems true to me. That seems right to me. I'm going to try to live by that. I'm going to try to breathe life into that. I'm going to try to move in the direction of that. And the statement that she heard, whether you agree with it or not, she agreed with it. The statement she heard was, you are a child of God. You do not inherit sickness, you inherit health. Now, keep in mind, the vision she had been painted or had been painted for her as a young person and as a child growing up, is she was kind of frail and weak and prone to being sick. That was a picture, right? Right? It was a vision. And here she's given something very different. And she must have been at the right place at the right time, because she began to use that. And she began to think differently. She began to see differently. She began to imagine that maybe her body didn't have to be weak, didn't have to be sickly, that maybe she could hold a vision of health and vibrancy and vitality. She was in her mid-40s, when she was given the prognosis that she had 2 years to live. She died at 86. Would you say that her vision worked? Her vision, we'll maybe use some of Myrtle in subsequent lessons, but her vision absolutely worked. So how do we do this? How do we paint this vision for ourselves? Where do we start? There was a line or an idea in this first chapter in the book that was new to me. And I want to share it with you because maybe it's new to you. It's the idea with respect to vision, we can approach it from one of two different angles. And I never considered it this way. We can start broad and zoom in, or we can start small and zoom out. Think about that for a moment. With vision, we can start broad, a very broad vision for our lives, and then zoom in, or we can start small and then zoom out. In the book, Arnold explains that his vision, so he was born in 1947 in a small village in Austria, and his vision as a young person was to leave Austria and come to America. Very broad vision. At the beginning of that vision, he says he didn't know what he wanted to do. He just had this broad vision, I want to come to America. But eventually, that broad vision, he began to zoom in, and it took a very specific path and some specific form along the way. I was thinking as I was reviewing my notes yesterday of other examples of starting broad and then zooming in with some specificity. I was thinking of Mahatma Gandhi. Very broad vision, right? Vision to do what? To free India from British rule. Would you say that's not broad? That's really broad and very audacious, big, bold vision, but very, very broad. I don't know when he began, I rather suspect when he began, the big, broad vision didn't have all the details figured out in the beginning. But with that big, broad vision, there came the time and opportunities to zoom in on pieces that would allow that vision or help that vision to be made manifest. You may remember the Salt March. The Salt March being one piece of many other things that Gandhi wound up doing, to have the Indian people boycott British salt because it was being very heavily taxed, and yet it was an important commodity. He had them boycott it. Similar boycott with textiles, to stop bringing in all of the textiles from England, and instead to weave their own very simple cloth. So broad vision, India should be free, India should govern itself. That eventually being mindful and aware and present to opportunities that could come forth, that then gave some specificity to how to bring that about. Think of Martin Luther King Jr. I have a dream. Boy, did he paint a vision, didn't he? He painted a vision. He described it so people could see. Could say the same thing of JFK, saying we will land a man on the moon before this decade is out, and we will bring him safely. Painted a what? A vision. Did they have all of the answers at the beginning? Probably not. Broad, and then zooming in with the specificity that was needed. What if we don't have this broad vision? what's suggested in the book is, well, then start where you are. Start small and zoom out. And what that can look like is really being mindful of the things that you do like to do, the things that you seem to have a talent for, and to begin to do those with even greater earnestness and greater excellence and greater consistency. And that when we do, we will likely find that that begins to open up new and different possibilities for us, where then we might be able to see more clearly this broader imagery, this broader vision for our lives. He suggests, and I think there's quite a bit of support for this idea, that we need to open up time and space to think. Time and space to think. Do you ever think about that? Think for a moment. Most people, when you ask them how they are, if everything's going okay physically, one of the most common answers is, I'm busy, right? I'm busy. And we probably all feel that way, and maybe we all are, maybe we aren't. But interestingly, we can fill our hours and our minutes with a lot of doingness. And I know that there's a lot of responsibility that probably every one of us in this room carries. We have things, adulting, right? We have things that you just have to do to take care of yourself and your family and all of that. But one of the things I've stopped to consider from time to time is this idea of making time to deliberately think. To deliberately think, not just to recycle thoughts I've had before, but to deliberately think. He suggests, and there's research to support this, that making time to think, one of the best ways we can do that actually is to go for a walk, and not with our headphones on. Not with our headphones, and not texting while we're walking, but to go for a walk, being just really open and spacious in our minds. Did you know that Beethoven used to take walks carrying a blank sheet of, blank pages of sheet music, so that as he was walking, if a melody or a sound or a tune came to him, he could write it down? I don't know if there's anybody that's documented what things he might have written down on a walk, but I bet they were good. And I wonder, had he not been out in nature and just giving himself the space to think and to receive, what music would we not have today that came as a result of that? Wordsworth, the Romantic poet, used to take a piece of paper with him or a notepad as he would walk the Lake District. It's called now the Lake District in England, and wrote some of his, or got ideas for some of his most beautiful works, walking that Lake District. Einstein, maybe you've seen documentaries and movies about him, would walk throughout Princeton University, and it said that he often, in just walking and letting his mind wander, would come up with some of his ideas about how the universe works. Pretty amazing to me, pretty amazing to me. Henry David Thoreau said, "The moment my legs begin to move, my thoughts begin to flow." Thich Nhat Hanh, many of you in this room have read many of his books, maybe had visited Plum Village or listened to his lectures. He was a strong advocate for mindfulness meditation while walking. While walking, really mindful. When we're mindful, when we're fully present, I think that we wind up much more naturally being in a place of receptivity, of being able to receive an insight, an idea, an answer to a problem, a detail for our vision, that when we're so distracted, or when we are multitasking, or when we are so outwardly busy, that there's no spaciousness for that divine inspiration or that divine idea to come. I remembered learning about this on our very first international trip as a family. We took a trip to the United Kingdom. And I remembered something about the importance of areas for people to walk in England. And so I went back and I did a little bit of research yesterday to see if my memory was right. And this is what I learned. My memory was right. That in England, they have something called the right to roam. The right to roam. And it's been now enshrined in Countryside and Rights Act of Way. It was enshrined in 2000. And this right to roam allows people to access to certain types of land for recreational purposes, such as walking, without needing permission from the landowner. Without needing permission from the landowner. The right to roam, the right to experience what I think teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh would say, openness and spaciousness. The right is not absolute, and it applies to certain types of land, like around lakes and mountains and downlands. Doesn't apply to cultivated land or gardens or a person's home. But access to being able to have this spaciousness, to allow oneself not only to think, but to receive thought. Let that settle for a moment. Spaciousness not only to think, but to receive thought. Myrtle Fillmore received a thought, received a vision that eventually became Unity Village. She received a thought in that lecture that eventually led to her health. In this process of vision, a piece that is important, very important, is a commitment to following and listening to your own still small voice, your own guidance, and sometimes, in particular, listening to that guidance or that feeling of dissatisfaction. I'm not talking about the feeling of complaining about things. I'm talking about that soul level feeling that you're just dissatisfied. Do you know what I'm talking about? Nod your head so I know that something's just not quite right in your life, about you, for you. A soul dissatisfaction. To just pay attention to that and try to be curious about how that might be trying to lead you toward a fuller, better fitting vision for yourself. In the book, he tells a story about a young woman by the name of Kelly who had been working in a video store. Remember those? Remember renting your videos, Blockbuster, all that? She was working in a store like that, and it was on the tail end of when videos were going out and streaming was starting to come in and Netflix and all that stuff. But she was feeling just very dissatisfied and longing for something else. And where she was working, she could look out across the parking lot to another store, and the other store that she could see was a florist. And she was drawn by the beauty of the floral arrangements in that store. And she started to want to know more about this. It was not something she had ever thought about before, but she was paying attention to the dissatisfaction that she was feeling where she was working, and she was curious about and drawn to the beauty of these floral arrangements. So she walked across the street and asked if she could help, if she could just be the apprentice to the florist in that shop. And the florist was an older woman and said, well, yes, you can, but I can't pay you. She said, that's okay. I just want to learn what it is that you do, how you do it. And she apprenticed with this woman for a period of time. And during that period of time, eventually the video store closed, and the florist couldn't take on a worker. But there was an opening in a nearby grocery store. You know how like your Vons and Albertsons have these beautiful floral departments? So she applied. And she was told, well, we only take people with experience. And she said, well, let me show you what I can do. They were so blown away by what she could do that they paid her to go to get formal training and be the manager of the store. So a small little example, right? But here you have someone who is paying attention to that still small voice or that, I'm not satisfied. Something's brewing inside of me. Something wants to be different. And then giving herself permission to be open, to be curious, to pay attention to what was right literally in front of her, and to take some steps and pursue that. You could say she started small, right? And then zoomed out and got a vision for her life that was much more pleasant and satisfying to her. Sometimes we have to back into things. Have you noticed that? Sometimes, we may not be able to answer the question of what we really, 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 really want. We may be clear on what we don't want. And if that's where you are, let that be okay. Get as clear as you possibly can with what you don't want. Make a big list of all the things that you don't want. Eventually, what will happen is what? Something's going to be left. Something's going to be left. And what's left, it may be in a variety of different realms, but something will be left, and you'll begin, if you're patient with yourself, to be able to flesh out a vision for yourself. Don't make the word vision sound like it's got to be this great big thing. It doesn't have to be the vision for freeing India. It doesn't have to be the vision for saving the planet. It can be, and if you have that, go for it. We need it. But it doesn't have to be that. It's what's true for you. Because if each of us is doing the very best job that we can of being who we are, using the gifts and the talents and the interests that we have in service not only to ourselves, but in service to one another, we will go a long way to healing our world with love. As I get ready to wrap this up, I want to wrap it up with a strong reminder of the power of visualizing. So we've talked about vision. Vision and visualizing are not the same thing. Vision is a noun. Vision is the target. Vision is the goal. Vision is what we're moving toward. Visualizing is the act. It's an action word. It is to practice holding in mind and heart what that vision is. I remember vividly sitting in what was then called Christchurch Unity San Diego now in Altadena, very new to metaphysics, very young, sitting in church, at that time going to 2 services a Sunday because I couldn't get enough of what Reverend Robert Stevens was teaching. I was gobbling it up, and I loved to see how he changed the talk from time to time between services. It was very, very interesting. And anyway, I can remember him talking about visualizing. I was still ice skating at that time. That's how young I was. I was still ice skating, and I also still had that youthful, maybe I still have it now, that youthful part of my mind that argues, part of my mind that might be a little skeptical that says, I'm going to test what this person's saying. And do they really know what they're talking about? Does this really work? And I respect that in you as well. I don't ever expect you to just take what I say because I'm saying it. Take what makes sense to you and test it. See if it works for you. So that's the space I was in when Bob was talking about visualizing. I thought, okay, if there's anything to this, then I should be able to visualize myself doing axles and double lutzes and flying camels and layback spins and all of that. And so I would spend time. I wasn't meditating. I was visualizing what was most important to me. And I did that for months and months and months. And you know what? I got better at every single one of those things. I still had to get out there at crack of dawn in that cold, damp rink and put my skates on. But something clicked in a different way because I saw it, I felt it, I rehearsed it again and again and again and again and again. Myrtle rehearsed and visualized again and again and again being sick because that's what she was told was the truth of her until she laid hold of a different idea. and then started telling herself and visualizing again and again and again and again a different picture. The principles and the tools still work. We just need to be consistent in using them. So we might start broad and zoom in. We might start small and zoom out. Either is fine. And when we have a sense of whatever that picture is, we engage actively in practicing seeing it and making it as real in our mind's eye as we possibly can. Namaste.